Good evening. This is Goldie, also known as Mr. Anecdotal. It's Wednesday, November 17th, 2010. Remember, most importantly, I rant, so you don't have to. I'm still working on lighting that does not make me look like a zombie, and I'm not succeeding. Remember the movie Dead Man Walking? Well, I am now going to be on an 8-foot projector in the secure location, and I'm known as Big Head Talking. I want to clarify a couple of things. The email that I send out weekly contains a transcript from the prior week. It's filled with typos and grammatical mistakes, even though I went to elite schools. I'm only doing that as a convenience to those of you that can't handle looking at me or hearing me live. Remember that I digress from the written remarks often, so the live version is more inclusive. Also, a friend commented that who is watching me when I come up with my facts for this rant? He really made me think, and I will give a couple of examples. When Bill O'Reilly has two women on his show and talks about the overreaching federal government in the same breath as Sarah Palin commenting on the FDA salt regulation story that was false, we know that the point of the story was to get Sarah Palin elected president, whether the story was true or not. When the New York Times reports on 27,000 abandoned wells in the Gulf of Mexico, or thousands of miles of corroding BP pipelines on the North Slope in Alaska, while there may be some political spin by the New York Times, what is the political agenda for reporting these corroding pipes or leaking wells? The corroding pipes and abandoned wells are really there, as admitted by their owners and operators. My main point is that I watch and read a lot of stuff. Most of it has a political agenda, some of it may not. If we can find the agenda, we can determine which of the facts are closer to truth. For example, the $200 million per day cost of Obama's trip to India. Anybody hear about that? Did any Fox watcher do any more investigating after 5 commentators used that dollar amount in one day? Hell no. Here's a brief summary of what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to talk about pat-down searches, full-body scanners, and mobile X-ray vans. I'm going to talk about waterboarding. I'm going to talk about healthcare. I'm going to talk about earmarks and other expenditures that are given to donors of the politicians who insert these items into budget bills. I'm really liking this guy, John Tyner. Don't touch my junk uproar. The link will be in next week's email, and I've got it here in front of me. Just to review what has been happening, this guy, John Tyner, said to the TSA screener at an airport that he did not want to go through the leukemia-spewing X-ray scanner, which I, in my Seinfeld kind of way, call a T-1000, named for the illegal shower heads on that particular episode, if anybody remembers it. And I'll use that T-1000 as the code word for the scanner. And also, Tyner did not want the pat-down search to include groping his junk. The quote was, "If you touch my junk, I'm going to have you arrested." He's become a sensation that we must use. On November 15th, 2010, Judge Napolitano on Freedom Watch, he's on every day, by the way, at 7 Central on the Fox Business Network, he had John Tyner on his show as a hero. The judge even called for all Americans to refuse both the pornographic image scanner and the sexual assault in the form of the pat-down search of your junk. The judge brought up the point of the Fourth Amendment's prohibition against unreasonable searches and seizures. He brought up the argument of search everyone, which makes everyone a suspect, and it makes the Fourth Amendment moot, which is exactly what happens in the airport security lines and, by the way, sobriety checkpoints. I completely agree with the judge. The key point here is that the Tea Partiers, constitutional conservatives, and libertarians will get a chance to become truly anti-war and pro-privacy. Watch Fox News and the Republicans' complete confusion over this issue. It's like a small BP oil gusher that everyone is talking about. Watch as we move down the slippery slope to protect against every possible known and unknown risk, which we have been doing. I can promise you, if we just had an attempted attack, there would be no uproar. This guy would be in jail. A first-time emailer sent me some rage that I need to read regarding John Tyner. in quotes, I'd like to know why CNN is putting its 2 cents in this instead of just reporting the news. Remember the underwear bomber supports strip searches. I think it's time to complain to sponsors and boycott news stations that support loss of liberty and dignity. I don't know how much further the government would have to go to be legitimately called a police state than taking naked photos of everyone getting on an airplane or submit to having your genitals felt up. Shouldn't every American think this is crazy? I feel nothing but disgust for the motor mouths that hold the public microphone and in fear or ignorance support this. What won't they support? Concentration camps? We know they're on board with torture and kidnapping. We're being conditioned to accept authoritarianism. Bend over and spread them, or you won't see Granny this year. That's from my buddy's email. I love that rage, and we must use this rage. It's Tea Party rage, by the way. This is when things can happen. Although, out of the confusion, bad things can happen. On November 16, 2010, O'Reilly and Ann Coulter, a lawyer, by the way, both agreed with the Israeli method of profiling people who get on the planes. They see the solution in this asymmetrical war on terror in profiling. Ann Coulter says, let's let the airlines do it. They know the frequent flyers. They have the manifests. She is saying, let the airlines, which are private entities, do the profiling. They're keeping that anti-Obama, which is anti-government thinking going. Confusion, confusion, confusion. John Stossel calls himself a libertarian. He's on Fox. He was on O'Reilly. Government workers suck. Israel got away from government screeners in 1995, is what he said. He said, use private industry and profiling. O'Reilly was actually the one who said use profiling. Stossel was again very stupid. He said, some of that would be okay, referring to profiling, but not too much, which would be evil. I mean, this guy's supposed to be an expert, by the way. I consider him an idiot. And yes, my friend who told me that when I call people idiots and assume I'm right, I better be right. In this case, Stossel is an idiot. They have a chance to talk about the extent of the trade-off of privacy for security. But they are just not smart enough to have that discussion. I am willing to take some risks to not give up those fundamental rights. As far as profiling, the damn pesky Constitution gets in the way again. We have this dreaded equal protection clause that makes us treat everyone in America the same. I was talking to my Tea Party friend today, and I warned him that we cannot let this incident and rage slide into profiling unless we amend the Constitution. Remember in a past rant when I was talking about one of my other intelligent friends who said he wanted torture to be legal? And before I could open my mouth, he said, by amending the Constitution to allow torture. At least it was an honest stand, understanding that the Constitution prohibits torture. Similarly, if we want racial profiling to occur in this country, whether it's in Arizona by the state, whether it's by the feds on that mirrored provision from the Arizona statute, if we want this kind of racial profiling to occur, let's just amend the Constitution to allow racial profiling. Don't argue that it doesn't happen, because it does. Until that time, even though I do admit that it will be effective, profiling is illegal. Quotes, I'd rather be less safe than give up my civil liberties, close quotes, said Jesse Ventura in his investigative show, Conspiracy Theory, in the episode called Big Brother. He says it better than I can, although I will continue to say it. Jesse is a performer, a great salesman, and an ex-governor. Fox reported on November 14, 2010, a news story showing that there was just released a new Taliban training video. November 14th, by the way. This shows an 8-year-old boy being used as a suicide bomber. The message looks like we cannot protect ourselves, so therefore any security measure that loses privacy is acceptable. Interestingly, the story came out right around the time of the Don't Touch My Junk controversy, where the media is now even reporting on a child being groped. There was a story on a grandmother and this child screaming and crying. But it's right at the same time that it shows the Taliban using children. Interesting. Fox just reported tonight that some of the images from the T-1000 scanners from a courthouse in Florida have appeared on the internet. This is exactly the main point that I have said in the past about surveillance cameras. The images cannot be protected. If you cannot protect the images, which it appears they can't, then you can't have the surveillance cameras, nor can you have the T-1000 scanners. They lied about whether they keep the images from the T-1000s. They do keep the images. It's a lie when they say they destroy the images. More importantly, who is talking about the mobile X-ray scanners, T-1000s, that are stalking cars and houses in God knows which cities in America, spewing cancer and leukemia in its wake? The link will be in next week's email. I've talked about the mobile X-ray vans before. These vans cruise the streets and look for IEDs, improvised explosive devices. The vans have been used by the Defense Department in Iraq and Afghanistan. They take the same scans that are taken in the airports, but they are mobile and are out on our streets looking inside our cars and any homes that are close enough to be affected by these X-rays. I have that link and it will be there next week. Where is the uproar over these pornographic pictures taken of us inside our homes? The interesting thing is that we have a Democratic administration, which allows the Tea Partiers and all those in opposition to Obama to raise havoc, which I actually think is a good thing. Where were they during the Bush years? And guess what? I don't care. I want to use their energy to limit privacy intrusions. I think that, similar to the judge's call to refuse the scanners and sexual assaults at airports, now is the time for action, not talk. Send the link to every legislator that you know of, every city council member, and do open records requests in your city to see if these vans are moving through your particular city, whether it's San Fran, New York, Dallas, Houston, Austin. And I have to ask, what is the possible benefit to these things cruising past our houses? Let's use this controversy right now. Now is the time for action, not talk. It's a BP oil gusher. Let's use it. Use it. Talk about it. Mobile X-ray scanners, much more egregious. We haven't had a terrorist attack in any of these cities by an IED. Okay. A slight discussion on the message of what I was just talking about. The judge on Saturday talked about the constitutional principle of a reasonable expectation of privacy. I've talked about it before. He talked about it in terms of your banking, social networking, and employers and other vendors and banks denying you credit, or an insurance company raising your rates due to a decline in your credit score. I bring this up because in his prior segment and throughout the show, he says, if it's not in the Constitution, then the federal government can't do it. Well, we are either going to look at the written words only, or we aren't. And to get to a principle of a reasonable expectation of privacy, we have to interpret the words because they don't appear in the Constitution. I mean, he's arguing from my point of view, but I must point out that he's doing the same type of spin that I complain about on Fox and MSNBC, the same type of message words. Another one is the judge talking about the T-1000 pornographic pictures, which I just did, by the way, being taken. Well, I agree with the point of view. I again have a duty to point out that the message words of pornographic pictures being taken in airports is a message. Sexual assault. When I say sexual assault on a pat-down, it's a message. We have to point out when we do it for our own benefit. And the really sick thing about this whole controversy is that the ex-TSA director, Michael Chertoff, is the CEO of the company that sells these T-1000s to the federal government and maybe sells the X-ray vans. I'm not sure of the name of the company. Again, A vendor donor used the revolving door out of government into the industry that he oversaw and regulated, and he gets the current government to buy these privacy-intruding devices with our taxpayer money, our commons. I digress when I say overturn Citizens United. That's the case that allows corporations to give as much as they want to politicians. I'm watching George W. Bush all over the place, and I just can't stop talking about the particular topic that George W. Bush just now in his book admitted that he had approved: torture. I want to do a correction on the waterboarding torture rant that I went through last week. I quoted a story that reported what waterboarding is. A friend of mine told me that the definition of waterboarding in that story was wrong. So I went to Wikipedia. According to Wikipedia, waterboarding is a form of torture, and this is painful, that consists of immobilizing the subject on his or her back with the head inclined downwards. Water is then poured over the face into breathing passages, thus triggering the mammalian diving reflex, causing the captive to experience the sensations of drowning. In contrast to submerging the head face forward in water, waterboarding precipitates an almost immediate gag reflex. It can cause extreme pain, dry drowning, damage to lungs, brain damage from oxygen deprivation, other physical injuries, including broken bones due to struggling against restraints, lasting psychological damage, and, if uninterrupted, death. Adverse physical consequences can manifest themselves months after the event, while psychological effects can last for years. The term waterboarding was coined in 2004. In 2007, it was reported that the CIA, the U.S. Intelligence Service, was using waterboarding on extrajudicial prisoners, and that the Department of Justice had authorized the procedure, even though the United States hanged Japanese soldiers for waterboarding American prisoners of war in World War II. Al-Qaeda suspects upon whom the CIA is known to have used waterboarding are Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, Abu Zabadiah, and Abd al-Rahim al-Nashiri. According to Justice Department documents, the waterboarding of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed provided information about an unrealized terrorist attack on Los Angeles. During the presidency of George W. Bush, U.S. government officials at various times said they did not believe waterboarding to be a form of torture. To justify its use of waterboarding, the administration of George W. Bush issued classified legal opinions that argued for a narrow definition of torture under U.S. law, including the Bybee memo, which it later withdrew. In January 2009, President Barack Obama banned the use of waterboarding. In April 2009, the U.S. Department of Defense refused to say whether waterboarding is still used for training. And since Barack Obama banned it, I guess we can all be confident that it is not being used. Dating back to the Spanish Inquisition, the suffocation of bound prisoners with water has been favored because, unlike most other torture techniques, it produces no marks on the body. CIA officers who have subjected themselves to the technique have lasted an average of 14 seconds before capitulating. According to at least one former CIA official, information retrieved from the waterboarding may not be reliable because a person under such duress may admit to anything, as harsh interrogation techniques lead to false confessions. The person believes they are being killed, and as such, it really amounts to a mock execution, which is illegal under international law, says John Sifton of Human Rights Watch. It is bad interrogation. I mean, you can get anyone to confess to anything if the torture's bad enough, said former CIA officer Bob Baer. Have we not learned from Israel? I mean, we are all over the correctness of Israel's racial profiling of its airline passengers. Why do we not believe in their documented studies that torture does not work? All right, I'm going to move along here. I want to talk about health care. We're hearing that the people have spoken. They hate Obamacare. Does anyone remember 2008? Rising premiums, denials of coverage, limited coverage, pre-existing conditions? Well, I do. And Obama was supposed to fix that. If you look at the big picture, in the big picture, these things will be fixed. The American people spoke back then, and healthcare is going to be one of those almost rights for everyone. Once you've made the decision that everyone is going to get it, healthcare, then the destruction of the industry through the abolishment of pre-existing conditions is the way to do it slowly. It's the only way they could get it passed. Here's an email from an old friend. Hey, Goldy. Only met you once when you visited us in Miami while you were dating my wife's friend. Stayed on your mailing list and enjoying your rant. Like your sponsors, I don't necessarily agree with all of the content. I do like the focus on issues and solutions without much of a political bias. Also, having quit my road warrior existence to take some time off and enjoy the family, your rant has had the effect of reawakening my love of philosophy, economics, and politics. Institute for Justice is one of my favorite organizations, so I'm familiar with Kelo. That's the takings case that the Supreme Court incorrectly decided. I marvel at how little our populace focuses on or understands the political issues or even the philosophical and constitutional basis for and against them. And that includes Sunday morning TV. It seems most people don't see or realize how these decisions will ultimately affect them and their freedoms. At times, I too am one of them. Your comment on criticizers never having read the health care bill is a good example. In your rant below, he's referring to my much earlier health care rants, you commented often on pre-existing conditions. I've had conversations about this very topic. Regarding insurance in the U.S., my view is that insurance for profit is practically impossible to implement in a way that maximizes outcomes for individuals. Clearly, pre-existing and other exclusions defeat the whole purpose. Insurance needs to be a cooperative whose costs are limited to administering that cooperative. Arguments can be made whether the cooperative should be national or at the state level, but inclusion cannot be based on competition for healthier individuals. As the size of the group reduces, you lose the benefits of diversification of risk, as well as some economies of scale. Regarding the outcry of why should I, an active, non-smoking, healthy eater, have to pay for the cost of the junk food eating, chain-smoking couch potato, there are studies indicating their early demise cuts off a tremendous amount of cost that would have occurred in their latter years. In any case, the alternative is unacceptable, namely two broad classes of insured with the less healthy pool paying extra money to be insured. Even policing such a system implies a cost. Regarding healthcare delivery, that is, in my mind, a more complex issue. My wife's uncle in the Northeast is a surgeon and told me this story. He's an immigrant and was having financial difficulties while starting his practice, so he took on employment with a large hospital. A senior surgeon discussed a patient with him and asked him to perform a colostomy. After examining the patient and his records, he concluded a laxative was in order. He was asked to perform the surgery again and he refused. Later, he received a page that the patient was having post-surgical issues and the surgeon was not responding. Could he come in? He did so, not happily, but was relieved to learn that meanwhile the original surgeon had arrived. The patient died. My uncle quit the hospital disgusted. Holy smokes. But if the profit motive is removed, how do we ensure we have a steady supply of the best and brightest to study medicine as opposed to more lucrative areas, e.g. law perhaps? Maybe most of us never have the opportunity to see the cream of the crop anyway. I find it hard to believe that choice will not be ultimately reduced as a consequence, though I have to admit I have not substantiated this or reasoned through it meticulously. Only two ways to have doctors doing the right thing. One, ensure doctors have high moral standards. That won't work. And two, remove the incentive for doing wrong. The latter is obviously easier to implement and understandably causes outrage in moral doctors. Another story. I went for a return visit to the doctor in Germany after a car accident. Must have been 60 people in the office ahead of me. But she saw me after 15 minutes and asked me how I was doing. After a typical formal response, she told me to go. Wait a minute. Are you going to examine me? How am I doing? How long do I need to wear this neck brace? If supply and demand don't drive the tough choices, how will a person do it? For example, should a national health care system pay for a dying cancer victim's treatment and for how long? There are a lot of strong arguments for all points on the spectrum, from they're on their own to cover everyone for everything until they don't need it anymore. Ethics versus economics. M in Miami Beach. M, really thanks for the email is what I sent him back. You bring up some very good points, the most noteworthy of which is that people do not read the things they like or dislike in national bills. The Republicans, Tea Partiers, and Fox have said that Obamacare is the most egregious overreach by the federal government since the inception of the Union. I like to put it another way. If we have chosen that we want health care for all, please note that we already have it for everyone over 55. Private industry is not going to be the way to deliver such care efficiently. Again, if we have decided that we want to have health care for everyone, then we can't have private industry doing it. There are too many wrong incentives. Although I do agree that the government is not an efficient method of delivering anything either. I had a good talk with a guy today who has 2 kids, and he was complaining about Tea Partiers wanting to get rid of Obamacare and public education, which I've said too. I told him that I thought that the two are slightly different, even though we have a national interest in good health, subject to saving money by fat people dying earlier, and good education, at least so they don't break into our houses. We know, however, that there is a distinct difference in that when health care fails, you die. When education fails, you get idiocracy. That's the key difference. In 2008, Americans spoke and said they wanted health care for all. Obama ran on that platform. Now, in this 2010 election, they are supposedly saying that they don't like the method that our federal government has chosen, due to talking heads and pundits, to give health care to all. A good example of the system that we have now, and when I say now, I mean the current system prior to Obamacare, is a story out of USA Today dated November 10th, 2010, entitled "Taking on Blue Cross." It details a company attempting to help Ford cut its physical therapy costs, TheraMatrix. When Ford attempted to do this, allegedly, Blue Cross squeezed the third-party company out of the business. A couple of things out of the article. The Massachusetts Attorney General's office has been investigating whether relationships between insurers and hospital networks in that state have driven up health costs for consumers. Goldy says they have. Pennsylvania's insurance department is investigating whether Blue Cross plans in that state are engaged in anti-competitive practices. Goldy says they are. In 24 states, 2 or fewer health insurers control 70% or more of the market. A study this year by the American Medical Association found. Goldy says that's not a free market, so don't say let's leave it to the free market. In 24 states, 2 or fewer health insurers control 70% or more of the market. Does that mean they have pricing power? Of course they do. I want to digress for a second. I just had something done. It was a procedure. And they gave me an estimate. They handed it to me a couple of weeks before I went in. The estimate was blank. They even said the estimate was blank, because they didn't know how much it was going to cost. If they found something, they'd have to cut it out. What person would possibly get an estimate on a plumbing job in their house or on some cabinetry in their house without getting the actual written estimate? In other words, somebody said, I'm going to give you an estimate, and then you go and you hand them a sheet of paper and you have to sign it, and it says, I don't know what the estimate is. Tell me that that system is not broken. I still don't know how much it was going to cost. I used up my deductible, so I was like, let's get everything done this year. Remember, my main point about people's opinions are that if you or someone in your family or your friends have ever had a pre-existing condition or been denied coverage or hit the upper limit of that policy, these people like Obamacare. They haven't read Obamacare, but they like it. If you've never had any of these things, you hate Obamacare. And you've never read it. You've never read your own policy. I just wish people were more honest in their argument, kind of like the email from my friend. If you're okay with poor people getting less care and dying because of it, just say it. Also, by eliminating pre-existing conditions, you will destroy the current system. Companies will choose to get out of the business rather than cover profit-losing obese diabetics with skin cancer who smoke cigarettes. They will get out of the business. Hospitals will close. Doctors will be unemployed. They will eventually be hired by the government. Goldy's opinion is that if you decide that you want everyone to have health care, since it is a strange type of service where if you don't have it, you die, and companies make more money if you don't get care, then this is perhaps one of the services that government must perform. And it appears we have made that decision, that everybody needs to be covered. Okay, I want to go on to earmarks. You've been hearing a lot about this low dollar amount of earmarks. I had said something about it a couple of weeks ago, and let's just talk about it a little bit. Goldy believes that it is important to look at every expenditure and determine if it needs to continue and what policy is being promoted, or is it just a giveaway of the commons? This is important. As I've been saying, that it is critical for radical thoughts to get away from the structural regulatory defects that are plaguing our system, including the Citizens United problem and the Michael Chertoff revolving door problem. I've called for an elimination of all subsidies to parents in the tax code, for example. That's what I talk about as a radical thought. Judge Napolitano had Senator Inhofe from Oklahoma on his show, and the senator was arguing about weapons systems and earmarks. The senator said that under the definition that is being proposed to restrict earmarks, certain weapons systems cannot have appropriations. If you may remember, a few weeks back, it took me 10 seconds to dismiss this argument. I said, everything is an earmark. Okay, Goldy's wrong. Wikipedia shows that congressional earmarks are often defined loosely as guarantees of federal expenditures to particular recipients in appropriations-related documents. The Federal Office of Management and Budget defines earmarks as funds provided by Congress for projects or programs where the congressional direction, in bill or report language, circumvents executive branch merit-based or competitive allocation processes or specifies the location or recipient, or otherwise curtails the ability of the executive branch to manage critical aspects of the fund's allocation process. Attempts have been made to define earmarks in ethics and budget reform legislation. They're trying to do it now. However, due to the controversial nature of earmarks and the effects these definitions would have on congressional power, none of these has been widely accepted. And keep watching. Despite the lack of consensus definition, the one used most widely was developed by the Congressional Research Service, the public policy research arm of the U.S. Congress. Quotes, provisions associated with legislation, appropriations, or general legislation that specify certain congressional spending priorities or in revenue bills that apply to a very limited number of individuals or entities. Earmarks may appear in either the legislative text or report language, which are committee reports accompanying reported bills and joint explanatory statement accompanying a conference report. In the United States legislative appropriations process, Congress is required, by the limits specified under Article 1, Section 9 of the United States Constitution, to pass legislation directing all appropriations of money drawn from the U.S. Treasury. This provides Congress with the power to earmark funds it appropriates to be spent on specific named projects. The earmarking process has become a regular part of the process of allocating funds within the federal government. Earmarking differs from the broader appropriations process in which Congress grants a yearly lump sum of money to a federal agency, like the Defense Department. These monies are allocated by the agency according to its legal authority and internal budgeting process. And as I've said, it's totally defective because it goes to the donors. With an earmark, Congress directs a specified amount of money from an agency's budget to be spent on a particular project. In the past, members of the Congress did not have to identify themselves or the project. However, as a result of recent reforms in Congress, earmarks are associated with requesting members in conference reports, and members must certify that they and their immediate families have no direct financial interest in the earmark. And since Charlie Rangel is not getting in any trouble, we can see what those restrictions on the congressmen are going to do to those people that actually do get a direct financial interest. Earmarks have often been treated as being synonymous with pork barrel legislation. Despite considerable overlap, the two are not the same. What is an earmark is an objective determination, while what is pork barrel spending is subjective. One legislator's pork is another's vital project. In March 2010, the House Appropriations Committee implemented rules to ban earmarks to for-profit corporations. According to the New York Times, approximately 1,000 such earmarks were authorized in the previous year, worth only $1.7 billion. Congressmen are making the argument that it is not so much the amount of earmarks, but the fact that earmarks are attached to much larger legislation to get that politician to approve the larger legislation. At least that's what you're hearing on Fox. So an earmark is a specific designation of an appropriation to a specific project or locality. Looking at something that is not an earmark, but is an egregious giveaway to realtors and home builders, as well as homeowners, is the following story. In the New York Times, November 13th, 2010, Taking Aim at the Mortgage Tax Break by David Kosciuszko. And he's talking about the mortgage tax deduction. Sorry, my realtor friends. By proposing to curtail the tax deduction for mortgage interest, the President's Deficit Commission is sounding an alarm. Michael Berman of the Mortgage Bankers Association said ending the mortgage tax break would hurt consumers. The home mortgage deduction is one of the most widely used and expensive tax subsidies. More than 35 million Americans claim it, and the federal government estimates it will cost the Treasury $131 billion in foregone revenue in 2012. Its size, popularity, and link to the emotionally charged American notion of home ownership has made it so politically sacrosanct that there are serious doubts whether Congress will even entertain the idea. But by raising the specter of ending one of the most cherished tax breaks, the Commission is trying to jar the public into recognizing the magnitude of the nation's budget deficit and some of the drastic steps that might be needed to close it. Which is what we're doing here, by the way. The proposal, part of a draft by co-chairman Alan K. Simpson and Erskine B. Bowles, suggested that the tax code could be streamlined and income tax rates drastically lowered by eliminating the $1.1 trillion in annual tax expenditure entitlements, subsidies, and breaks given to targeted businesses and individuals. The Commission chairman also offered the option of capping the deduction at $500,000 on mortgages rather than the current limit of $1 million. The prospect brought an angry outcry. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi blasted the Commission's suggestions, saying it would force middle-class homeowners to subsidize tax breaks for the wealthy. Officials in the real estate and mortgage industries warned that ending the deduction could cripple an already ailing housing market. The mortgage interest deduction is one of the pillars of our national housing policy, said Michael D. Berman, chairman of the Mortgage Bankers Association. Limiting its use will have negative repercussions for consumers and home values up and down the housing chain. But our current national housing policy is absolutely working. Let's get people who can't afford it to buy houses so that they can default in my neighborhood and bring down the value of my home because I can't afford it. Going back to this article. But tax policy experts say that for all its popularity, the value of the deduction in public policy is debatable. It was intended to encourage home ownership, but housing economists point out that countries like Canada and Australia, which do not allow mortgage interest deductions, have home ownership rates similar to those of the United States. And I've said before, almost nobody should own a home. If it takes you 2 incomes to own a home, you can't have a home because you might lose one of the incomes. You need 1 income to buy the home, but you need to have 2 incomes in the household. You need to be flexible. You need to be able to move. You need to be able to get rid of your rental place, and move. You need to be like Detroit auto workers and move to Dallas or San Antonio at the drop of a hat. You need to be able to move out of San Francisco and move to Austin, if that's where better jobs are. You need flexibility. We do not need home ownership. We have groups, realtors, home builders that give huge sums of money on the Supreme Court case of Citizens United to politicians to keep this thing going. And not only do we other taxpayers pay, we other homeowners pay for the wrong people owning homes. Going back to the article. What the subsidy is doing is driving up prices by encouraging well-off people to take out bigger loans to buy bigger houses, said Roberton Williams, a fellow at the Tax Policy Center. So I think there's a question about whether that is something the government should be doing with tax money. Actually, it's encouraging not well-off people to take out loans at all to buy homes. Critics of the subsidy also argue that, despite its broad support, the benefits from the mortgage interest deduction flow disproportionately to the wealthy. That's true. Calvin Johnson, a tax professor at the University of Texas, said that only those in the top third of wage earners even itemize their deductions, meaning that 2/3 of taxpayers weren't eligible for the break, even though they may own a home. You have to have a high enough income level for it to work for you on Schedule A. If you don't itemize, you get the standard deduction, which means tenants get the standard deduction. No one can make a serious intellectual argument in favor of the mortgage interest deduction, he said. Why should the government subsidize homeowners rather than renters? The only thing it's good for is middle-class votes. Yes, and realtors and builders. That's why they give money to the politicians to keep it going. Whether or not a change is included in the Deficit Commission's final report, tax policy experts say Congress would probably not consider it except as part of a major overhaul of the tax code. Even so, economists say that the debate will help clarify the difficult choices the country faces. Finally, something true in this article. The rhetoric of tax cutting so dominates the political debate in Washington that many elected officials are reluctant to acknowledge that the federal government devotes about as much money to tax breaks, $1.1 trillion, as it does to discretionary spending. So when you talk about cutting earmarks or discretionary spending or spending that's outside of the ability to cut it, I guess what they mean is Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and defense are things that are not discretionary. We have to do them. So they're saying that the tax breaks that we grant in this country, oil depletion allowance, home mortgage interest deduction, everything, 1.1 trillion, it's the same amount as we have in discretionary spending. Part of the structural regulatory defect is who gets those tax breaks. What this proposal does is stress the theme that tax cuts have the same effect as spending, said Edward C. Kleinberg, a tax professor at the University of Southern California and former chief of staff of the Congressional Joint Committee on Taxation. It's a theme people want to resist, but it is a fact. Giving a tax break without cutting spending is the same as the government writing out checks to people. Interestingly, this is one of the sacrosanct giveaways that costs huge sums of money, adds to the deficit, and skews the free market, as though the free market really exists. All right. Quick digression. I want to talk about masterful politics for a brief second out of Obama. Yes, he is still the smartest guy in the room. Two things. One, troops in Afghanistan until 2014. And two, no trial for Khalid Sheikh Mohammed until after the 2012 election. Watching Brit Hume on Fox stumble, and he vocally stumbles all the time, but he stumbles over the failure of the policy, referring to the trial of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed in New York City, then in Guantanamo. So he's waffling. He doesn't know. He can't figure it out. And when Obama says we're going to have troops in Afghanistan until 2014, we don't have to worry about a not tough on security re-election statement that you're going to get out of Sarah Palin and Rick Perry, and two, an exoneration of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, which could happen just like the guy today that was exonerated from 280 counts except for one count. By the way, Fox is all over that. They're crazy. They're going crazy over the fact that a jury trial showed this guy to be innocent, and they're commenting that it didn't work. We have jury trials for a reason. You're innocent or you're guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Okay, going back, think about the thing about the Afghanistan date is that it tries to separate the Tea Partiers away from the Republicans. Republicans will support the wars. Tea Partiers are supposed to not want the wars to continue. As libertarians, small government. This is masterful. Watch it. Watch how it denies them a huge re-election or election point. That's all there is today. I want to thank our sponsors, all of which support this form of conversation, but not necessarily the content of this conversation. PianoByAngelo.com, Angelo Limbesis, who teaches and plays keyboards all over Austin. ZetaDesign.com for all of your decorative painting needs. She can make anything look like anything. AustinAreaPlumbing.com for all of your Austin plumbing problems. www.ticoadventurelodge.com, that's T-I-C-O, adventurelodge.com, a small hotel in Samara, Costa Rica. CNC Surf School in Samara at www.cncsurfsamara.webs.com. La Vela Latina, a great sunset restaurant in Samara. Ambar Tequila at www.santosspirits.com, an extremely smooth tequila. And let me tell you, I was there when some of that tequila was drinkingly. People drank it at a party, out of a freezer. And it is smooth, they said. And another cool little hotel in Samara at www.villablancasamara.com. And our newest sponsor, the Delicate Genius Houston Hedge Fund Manager. Thanks and God bless.